Hello, and welcome to today's story. My name is Philip, and I like to dive deep into scary Asian stories and cover them in my videos. If you have an interesting story you want me to cover, let me know in the comments. I always read all comments. For now, let's get into today's story, where we have a few terrifying tales to share. One of them takes us straight into the glittering heart of Taipei, inside a hotel that prides itself on luxury, but hides something far more unsettling behind its polished glass walls. The Grand Hyatt Hotel is one of the city's most prestigious landmarks, a place where diplomats, celebrities, and travelers gather beneath crystal chandeliers and marble floors. On the surface, it is a symbol of modern Taipei, a beacon of comfort and refinement. But ask the locals, and you will hear a different story whispered in hushed tones. They say the land beneath the Hyatt was once soaked in blood, a former military prison and execution ground during the chaos of World War II. And if the walls could speak, they would not tell stories of fine wine and banquets, but of screams, shadows, and restless souls that never left. Guests who come for five-star luxury often find something else, a heaviness in the air that cannot be explained, elevators that move without reason, and cries in the night that sound too real to be imagination. This is the kind of story that makes you think twice before turning out the lights in your hotel room. In the heart of Taipei, where neon lights reflect across wide boulevards, and the hum of the city never truly fades, stands the Grand Hyatt Hotel. It is a monument of glass and steel, towering above the busy streets like a promise of comfort to anyone stepping inside. For most travelers, it is a place of rest, a place where business meetings, glamorous banquets, and long-awaited vacations begin. Yet for one particular guest, the hotel would not be remembered for its luxury. It would be remembered for something much colder, something that crept into the room when the lights went out. The guest, a traveler who had arrived on business, had no reason to be suspicious. The hotel was famous, a trusted name, the kind of place that impressed clients and reassured families back home. Check-in was smooth, polite staff at the desk offering warm smiles as they handed over the key card. Everything seemed perfect, the kind of service one would expect in a city that never sleeps. But as the guest walked deeper into the marble corridors, something felt slightly off. Not wrong exactly, just heavier, as if the walls themselves carried a weight that could not be seen. The assigned room was on one of the upper floors, a quiet wing away from the bustle of the lobby. The elevator ride was uneventful, soft music playing in the background, but as the doors opened, the hall seemed strangely empty. Not just quiet, but hollow, as though sound itself was reluctant to exist there. The traveler paused for a moment, brushing it off as exhaustion from the flight. Still, a faint unease lingered as the keycard slid into the lock and the door opened with a muted click. Inside, the room was exactly what one would expect from a five-star hotel. Crisp white linens stretched neatly across the bed, a polished desk set near the window, curtains drawn back to reveal a glittering view of Taipei's skyline. Everything was immaculate. And yet, the longer the guest stood inside, the more the perfection felt unnatural, as though the room had been staged for someone who wasn't meant to stay long. A faint chill ran along the traveler's arms, though the air conditioning had not yet been touched. The purpose of the stay was simple: a few nights in Taipei for important meetings, a handful of dinners with clients, then back home. Nothing unusual, but as luggage was placed by the bed and shoes were kicked off, the atmosphere of the room seemed to press closer, filling the empty space with something that wasn't entirely welcoming. It wasn't just jet lag or the silence of being alone in a new city. It was something else. The guest tried to shake it off, unpacking clothes, setting toiletries by the bathroom sink, and turning on the television for background noise. But the sound didn't help. It only seemed to highlight the stillness of the room. The faint hum of the air vents, the occasional knock of pipes, the subtle creak of wood beneath the carpet, each sound seemed amplified, as though the hotel itself wanted its presence to be known. By the time night fell, Taipei's streets below buzzed with nightlife, headlights weaving across the avenues. From the window, the city looked alive. But inside the room, behind locked doors, the guest couldn't shake the feeling that they were not entirely alone, that perhaps someone else had walked those very floors before them, someone who had never truly left. The bed was inviting, the sheets cool and clean, yet climbing beneath them didn't bring comfort. Instead, it felt like settling into a space that had already been claimed. The guest pulled the covers tighter, forcing eyes shut, telling themselves it was just the fatigue of travel. But in the stillness of that room, the thought refused to leave. This was more than just a hotel stay. Something unseen was already waiting. The first night passed in restless fragments, but nothing happened that could not be explained away. Perhaps the odd creaks of the floorboards were simply the age of the building. Perhaps the sudden chill was only the air conditioning cycling on. Morning light over Taipei made everything feel normal again, and the guests laughed quietly at their own unease. But as the second evening approached, something began to shift. It started in the lobby. After a long day of meetings, the traveler returned to the Grand Hyatt, briefcase in hand, ready for nothing more than a quiet dinner and a few hours of sleep. The receptionist who handed back the room card smiled politely, but her eyes lingered just a moment too long, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't, as if she recognized the number printed on the card and hesitated. The smile was forced, her words clipped. "Enjoy your evening," she said, but her voice carried no warmth. The guest noticed it again when speaking with another staff member near the elevators. A simple question about where to find the best local food was answered quickly, almost hurriedly. But when the staff member glanced at the key card still in the guest's hand, his expression shifted. The cheer dropped from his face, replaced by something harder to read. He nodded once, almost nervously, then excused himself and walked away. It was a small thing, but enough to leave the traveler wondering. The elevator ride up was quiet, the same soft music playing through hidden speakers. But this time, the doors didn't open directly to the assigned floor. They opened first on a floor no one had pressed. The panel showed no request, yet the car slowed, the doors sliding apart with a hollow chime. The hallway beyond was dark, no lights flickering on to welcome anyone. No footsteps echoed. It was completely still. The traveler pressed the button again quickly, heart beating faster than expected, and the doors closed with a reluctant sigh. When they finally stepped off at the correct floor, the hall was just as silent as before, but the stillness now felt heavier. Unlocking the door to the room, the traveler noticed something odd. The television was on, just static, filling the air with a low hiss. They were certain it had been off when they left that morning. Shaking their head, they turned it off and set their things down. Perhaps housekeeping had accidentally bumped the remote. Still, it felt strange, as if someone had been inside. The evening stretched on. A simple meal in the restaurant below, a walk through the glowing city streets, and then back to the room. But the sense of being watched never quite faded. Lying in bed that night, the traveler tried to dismiss the feeling, but every time the curtains shifted slightly with the air current, it felt like a figure moving just out of sight. Every time the pipes knocked, it sounded less like plumbing and more like footsteps tapping slowly against the wall. Sometime past midnight, the first true disturbance came. The guest woke abruptly, heart racing, unsure what had pulled them from sleep. The room was dark, but colder than before, much colder. Breath fogged faintly in the air, impossible for the climate outside. Then came the sound, faint but clear, a low cry like someone in pain. Not loud, not dramatic, just a drawn-out moan that seemed to drift through the walls. The guest sat upright, straining to hear. Silence followed. For a moment, it felt like imagination. But then, again, the sound returned. A broken voice, as though someone far away was calling out from the depths of the building. The cry rose, cracked, and fell silent again. They got up quickly, checking the hallway outside. Nothing. The corridor was empty, perfectly still, with no sign of life. Returning to the room, unease grew sharper. The desk near the window looked slightly different, the chair angled away as if it had been moved. Yet no one had come in, at least no one living. The rest of the night passed in a haze of half-sleep, waking often to small noises, the elevator doors chiming somewhere in the distance, though no one walked the hall. The faint rattle of metal, as if chains dragged against stone. The cold never left the room. By morning, the traveler was pale, exhausted, but determined not to let paranoia ruin the trip. They convinced themselves it must have been another guest, perhaps someone drunk and loud in the night. Hotels were full of strange noises, but deep down, the questions lingered. Why had the staff reacted so strangely to the room number? Why did the elevator stop on a floor no one had requested? Why had the television been on when no one touched it? The Grand Hyatt shone in daylight as a temple of wealth and luxury. But beneath that gleaming surface, something was beginning to stir. Something tied to the past, waiting patiently in silence, and growing bolder as the nights went on. The guests told themselves it was nothing, but the next night would prove them wrong. By the third night, the unease could no longer be brushed off as coincidence. The guest had gone through the day's meetings like a machine, smiling, shaking hands, but the thought of returning to that room gnawed quietly at the back of the mind. The Grand Hyatt was beautiful, yes, but beauty often hides teeth. When they returned late in the evening, the lobby was still alive with music from a wedding reception. Laughter and glasses, clinking, echoed through the marble hall. But in that noise, a moment caught the guest's attention. An older staff member was standing by the concierge desk, watching closely as the guest passed by. His eyes narrowed when he noticed the keycard. The gaze was sharp, almost warning. He gave a small shake of the head, subtle but deliberate, before turning away as though nothing had happened. The guest rode the elevator up, unsettled by the gesture. Once again, the car stopped on the wrong floor. This time, the doors opened to reveal a long corridor lined with dark wooden doors. The air seemed thicker there, the carpet damp in color, like it carried stains hidden beneath the fabric. Before the guest could press the button, a sound drifted in. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, marching in unison. The hallway remained empty, but the rhythm of boots against stone echoed, as if soldiers were advancing through invisible ranks. The doors closed quickly, the elevator resuming its climb, but the sound clung stubbornly to memory. When the guest finally reached their room, the keycard hesitated in the lock, the red light flashing before it finally clicked open. Inside, the room was darker than expected, the curtains drawn, even though they had been left open earlier. The smell of incense hung faintly in the air, sharp and out of place. It didn't belong to the guest. That night, sleep was broken again. Around 2 a.m, the temperature dropped suddenly, and the television flickered to life with a burst of static. The screen pulsed, white and gray lines cutting the silence. Then, in the reflection, the guests swore they saw movement. a figure standing behind them in the glass of the TV, though the room itself was empty. They turned quickly, but nothing was there. Uneasy, the guest decided to step out, hoping a walk down the hall might shake the nerves. As the door closed behind them, movement caught their eye. Along the far end of the corridor, a woman in housekeeping uniform stood still, almost waiting. She looked older, her back slightly bent, eyes dark with something unreadable. As the guest approached, she didn't smile. She simply muttered, "Don't stay in that room too long." Her tone was flat, more command than advice. Before the guest could ask what she meant, she turned sharply and disappeared into a service door that slammed shut behind her. The words echoed louder than the silence. "Don't stay in that room too long." Back inside, the atmosphere pressed heavier. The guest checked behind the curtains, the closet, even the bathroom, desperate to prove the space was empty. But the stillness mocked every movement. On the desk near the lamp, a new detail appeared. A piece of paper folded neatly, almost too deliberately. When opened, it revealed only a single Taoist talisman, the kind used to ward off spirits, bright yellow with red inscriptions. The handwriting was jagged. Ink bled into the paper as though hurried. No one had entered the room, at least no one with a keycard that could be explained. Yet there it was, sitting where the guest could not ignore it. By now, tension wound tight through every corner of the room. The strange cries from the night before returned, louder this time, as though closer, moans of pain, shouts in a language the guest couldn't fully understand, the sounds of struggle, of bodies falling, of metal against flesh, history bleeding into the present. The guest pressed their palms against their ears, but it did nothing. The noise wasn't around them, it was inside the walls themselves, vibrating through the bones of the building. The talisman sat on the desk like a silent explanation. The hotel wasn't just haunted, it was trying to keep something at bay. And yet, no one offered a full answer. Only stares, subtle warnings, and fragments of ritual. As the guest lay awake, heart racing, one question consumed them. What had really happened here, beneath all the marble and glass? And why was the staff so afraid to speak the truth? By the fourth night, the Grand Hyatt no longer felt like a hotel. It felt like a stage, carefully arranged, yet haunted by an audience no one could see. The guest moved through its glittering halls with a weight in their chest, each step echoing with questions that refused to be answered. The warnings, the stares, the talisman left in silence, everything pointed to something deliberately hidden. And that night, whatever it was, decided to step out of the shadows. The guest had just returned from dinner, trying to shake off the tension with good food and conversation. But the moment the elevator doors opened, the air shifted. The corridor was darker than usual. The lights dimmed, flickering faintly as though struggling to stay alive. The carpet muffled footsteps, but there was still another sound. A low shuffle, heavy and dragging, like boots scraping against stone. The guest froze, listening. The sound stopped instantly, leaving only silence behind. Unlocking the door with trembling fingers, the guest stepped into the room and found it waiting. The curtains once again drawn, the smell of incense stronger now, thick and cloying, and on the nightstand, another talisman. This one burned around the edges, blackened and curling as if fire had licked at it before being hastily extinguished. The guest's heart raced. Someone had been here again. Someone or something was trying to send a message. They backed away, nearly tripping over the suitcase still near the door, when the television clicked on by itself. But it wasn't static this time. The screen pulsed with flickering shapes. dark shadows moving in lines, silhouettes of men marching, rifles slung across their shoulders. Soldiers. Their faces blurred, yet their movements precise, mechanical, endless. And then, from the corner of the room, came the sound of chains dragging slowly across the floor. The guest turned, breath shallow, and froze. There was someone standing there, a man, tall, dressed in the tattered uniform of a soldier long gone. His face was pale, skin sagging as though drained of life, eyes hollow but burning with something unearthly. Around his neck hung a length of broken rope, fibers frayed, stained dark with age. His boots left no mark on the carpet, but each step sent a shiver through the room as he began to move closer. The guest stumbled back, hands scrambling for the door handle, but it refused to turn, locked. The soldier stopped only a few feet away, staring directly, lips parting to form a sound that wasn't a word but a scream, a raw, guttural cry that shook the walls. At that exact moment, the door burst open from the outside. 2 staff members rushed in, both holding bundles of incense sticks already lit, smoke rising thick into the room. Without a word to the guest, they moved quickly, circling the bed, the desk, the window, placing talismans against the walls with frantic precision. The smoke grew heavy, filling the room with a bitter, stinging haze. The soldier's form wavered, shifting like heat on asphalt, his scream rising louder before suddenly snapping into silence. The staff bowed their heads, murmuring chants under their breath, voices low and urgent. One pressed another talisman onto the television screen, which immediately went dark. The other pushed the guest gently but firmly toward the hallway. "Don't stay here," she whispered sharply, eyes wide with fear. The guest, coughing against the incense, stumbled out into the corridor, turning back only once. Inside the room, the figure of the soldier was dissolving into the smoke, piece by piece, like ash scattered on the wind. The sound of boots faded into nothing, leaving only the muffled hum of the hotel's ventilation. Confusion and terror churned in equal measure. What had just happened? Why had the staff come so suddenly, so prepared, as though they had been expecting this exact moment? The guests demanded answers, but the staff only shook their heads, guiding them firmly toward the elevator. "It's not safe," one repeated, refusing to say more. As the doors closed, the last thing the guests saw was the open doorway of their room, smoke curling out like a warning, talismans glowing faintly in the dim light. The Grand Hyatt, so polished and pristine by day, had revealed its other face. Not just haunted, but alive with something ancient, restless, and violent. In that instant, the guest understood. The stories weren't whispers or exaggerations. They were truth. And no matter how many crystals hung in the lobby, no matter how many layers of marble covered the walls, the foundation of the hotel was built on blood. And the dead were not done reminding the living. The elevator descended slowly, every second thick with silence. The guest stood pressed against the back wall, the scent of incense still clinging to their clothes, their mind racing with what they had just witnessed. The staff member who had pulled them out of the room stood beside them, clutching a bundle of burned incense sticks wrapped tightly in cloth. Her expression was grim, her eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers, as though afraid to look anywhere else. When the doors finally slid open into the quiet of the lobby, the chaos of the wedding reception had ended. Only a few scattered guests lingered near the bar, laughter echoing faintly, unaware of what had unfolded just floors above their heads. The staff member guided the traveler toward a side corridor, away from curious eyes, stopping at an unmarked door that led into a small back office. The room smelled faintly of wax and smoke. On the wall hung more talismans, yellow slips of paper covered in crimson ink. The staff member finally spoke, her voice hushed but urgent. "You shouldn't have stayed in that room. We told them not to use it." The words hit harder than expected. Not to use it. As if the hotel knew exactly what haunted those walls and yet still handed out keys to unsuspecting guests. The guest demanded an explanation, struggling to keep the tremor from their voice. What had that soldier been? Why were the rooms filled with talismans? Why had no one warned them from the beginning? The woman's gaze dropped to the incense bundle in her hands. She hesitated, as though choosing her words with painful care. "This hotel," she began, "was built on ground that should have been left untouched. During the war, the Japanese military used this place as a prison. Prisoners, soldiers, innocents, it didn't matter. Many died here, some by gunfire, some by rope, others—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Their suffering was deep, too deep. That kind of pain does not leave with the body." The guest felt their stomach tighten, the cries in the night, the smell of smoke, the shadows on the television. It all connected now. "The walls, remember," the staff continued. "Every stone, every floorboard holds what happened. When the hotel was built, people thought marble and glass would bury the past. But it doesn't work that way. The past does not care about luxury. It does not care about 5 stars. Her voice lowered further, though even in this hidden room she feared being overheard. "The soldiers you saw, the voices you heard, they are not just ghosts. They are memories repeating themselves. And some nights, those memories break free." The guest swallowed hard, struggling to speak. "But why me? Why that room?" The woman finally looked up, her expression strained. "Some rooms are worse than others. That one." She let out a slow breath. "Executions were carried out there. The rope around his neck, you saw it, didn't you?" The image slammed back into the guest's mind. The hollow eyes, the frayed rope dangling across the soldier's chest. "We try to keep them away," she said, gesturing toward the talismans on the wall. "Incense, prayers, blessings. But it only holds for so long. That's why you found charms in your room. That's why you smelled smoke. We've placed them everywhere, hidden behind paintings, under the furniture. But sometimes the spirits grow too strong." The guest pressed their hands against the desk, needing something solid to ground them. Every strange moment from the past days lined up like puzzle pieces falling into place. The receptionist's lingering stare, the elevator stopping on silent, empty floors, the older staff member shaking his head, the warning whispered by the housekeeper. All of it made sense now. They hadn't been imagining things. The staff knew. They always knew. "But why not close the rooms?" the guest asked, voice breaking with frustration. "Why let people stay if you know what's there?" The woman's silence was answer enough. Money, reputation. The Grand Hyatt was too important, too prestigious. Admitting what haunted its walls would stain its name forever. And so they kept the truth buried, just like the dead beneath the marble floors. The guest leaned back, shivering as the weight of the revelation settled. It wasn't just a haunted hotel. It was a monument built on top of unhealed wounds. Every luxury suite, every banquet hall, every glittering chandelier sat directly above a prison of restless souls. The staff member finally handed the guest a fresh talisman, her hand trembling slightly. "Keep this with you tonight. Don't stay in that room again. Ask to move. Say anything you need to, but don't go back there." The paper was light, fragile in the traveler's hand, yet it carried a gravity far heavier than its size. They nodded slowly, realizing that what had begun as an ordinary business trip had turned into something far darker. The hotel was no longer a place to rest, it was a place to survive. As the guest stepped back into the glowing lobby, everything looked the same. Smiling couples crossed the marble floors, the bar-filled glasses, music hummed softly through hidden speakers. But now, the glitter of the Grand Hyatt seemed like a mask, thin and brittle, stretched over a truth too heavy to be hidden. The staff's words repeated in the traveler's mind, chilling with every step. This wasn't just a story of ghosts. It was a story of blood, of echoes that refused to fade, of luxury built on suffering. And no matter how many talismans lined the walls, the past was always waiting. Waiting to be remembered. Waiting to be seen. The guests left the back office with the talisman clutched tightly in their hand. The lobby gleamed as if nothing had happened, chandeliers glittering overhead, bellboys smiling at arriving guests, the hum of luxury life uninterrupted. For everyone else, the Grand Hyatt was still a palace. But for the traveler, every polished surface now looked like a mirror hiding shadows. They approached the front desk, words rehearsed in their throat, a request to change rooms, to leave early, anything to get away. But the receptionist barely met their eyes. She glanced at the talisman tucked between the guest's fingers, and her face tightened. Without a word, she slid a new key card across the counter. No explanation, no apology, just a silent acknowledgement that some things were better unspoken. The new room was on a different floor, closer to the bustle of the elevators. The door opened to reveal a space that looked identical to the first white sheets, soft lights, city views, but the air felt different here, lighter somehow. For the first time in days, the guest thought they might be able to sleep. Yet as they placed the talisman carefully on the nightstand, a draft whispered across the room. The curtains stirred, though the windows were sealed. From somewhere deep within the walls came the faintest sound. Not a cry, not a scream this time, but a voice. Hoarse, almost human, whispering words in a language the traveler didn't understand. The sound faded quickly, as though pulled back into the bones of the building, but it left the skin crawling. The guest lay in bed, eyes wide open, clutching the covers tight. They knew the staff had done what they could. They knew this room was meant to be safer. But one thought refused to leave. If the ghosts could reach them in one room, what was stopping them from reaching them in another? Sleep never came. The night stretched on, filled with silence that was never truly silent. And as dawn crept across Taipei, the guests packed their bags with trembling hands, eager to leave the Grand Hyatt behind. But the memory would remain, the soldiers' hollow eyes. The talismans burned at the edges, the whispered warning that still echoed in their ears. Don't stay in that room too long. And somewhere, behind walls too proud to admit the truth, the cries of the dead waited for the next guest. Both the Grand Hyatt in Taipei and the Raffles Hotel in Singapore share something unsettling beneath their polished surfaces. On the outside, they are symbols of wealth, refinement, and prestige destinations where travelers expect nothing but comfort. Yet, within their walls, history lingers like a shadow that refuses to be erased. Both hotels were touched by the violence of war, their foundations stained by moments of suffering that no renovation could bury. At the Hyatt, echoes of executions rise through the marble floors. At Raffles, the restless spirit of a fallen soldier walks the same halls as royalty once did. Two hotels, two cities, both bound by the same truth. Luxury may hide the past, but it cannot silence it. And for some guests, checking in means coming face to face with ghosts that never left. One story done, and one to go. I hope you liked the stories so far. When I make these long videos, there are nights where I stay up really late working on them. Tomorrow I will be uploading another video. If you don't want to miss it, just subscribe. It's free. Singapore is a city that never seems to lose its glow. At night, the skyline hums with neon, the streets bustle with laughter and traffic, and the air is thick with the scent of food stalls tucked into every corner. For a visitor arriving in this vibrant place, it feels alive, modern, and unstoppable. Yet among all the skyscrapers and polished storefronts, there stands a building that seems frozen in another time. Its whitewashed colonial walls, green shutters, and quiet courtyards whisper of a past that the city's glass towers cannot erase. This is the Raffles Hotel, an icon of luxury, and for one particular guest, the setting of an experience they would never forget. The traveler arrived for reasons as ordinary as any other. A business conference by day, a chance to unwind by night. Raffles was the obvious choice, not only for its beauty and reputation, but for the weight of history it carried. Royalty, authors, and celebrities had all walked through its halls. To stay there meant being part of something larger, a story of elegance that stretched back more than a century. At least, that was the promise. The car pulled up beneath the grand entrance, colonial pillars rising above the soft glow of lanterns. Bellmen hurried to greet the guest, lifting luggage, with polished ease, their smiles practiced but genuine. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of marble and light, ceiling fans turning lazily above rattan furniture. Everything about the place spoke of refinement, yet beneath the soft music and polite greetings, there was an undertone, something quiet and unsettled, like a note of tension struck against the wrong string. Check-in was swift, the receptionist warm and efficient. But when she handed over the key, her gaze lingered for a second too long, as though she wanted to add something but chose instead to smile. The guest barely noticed. They were tired, eager only to find the room and rest before tomorrow's schedule. Still, the first step into the elevator carried with it a strange pause, a moment where the polished brass doors reflected not just the traveler's image, but something darker in the corner of the glass, gone as soon as the eyes focused. The room assigned was in one of the older wings of the hotel. The corridor leading there was lined with framed photographs, scenes of colonial Singapore, black and white portraits of past guests, and images of the hotel standing as it had through war and occupation. The guest stopped once, studying a photograph of uniformed soldiers standing stiffly in formation, their faces blurred with age. The air felt cooler there, and though footsteps echoed lightly on the tiled floor, it seemed almost as if others were walking too, just a step behind. The room itself was exquisite. High ceilings, polished wood floors, a canopy bed dressed in crisp white sheets. Through the shutters, the courtyard glowed faintly with lantern light, cicadas humming in the distance. It was peaceful, almost idyllic. Yet as the guests set their luggage down, a faint draft brushed across the room, stirring the curtains though the windows were closed. They frowned, checked the latch, but found nothing out of place. Unpacking, settling in, and preparing notes for the next day became a distraction. The room was comfortable, luxurious in every detail, but the silence carried a weight to it, the kind of silence that wasn't empty, but waiting, the kind that pressed against the ears until even the smallest sound, the tick of a clock, the hum of an air vent, felt magnified. The guests told themselves it was simply the strangeness of being in a new place, one that carried too much history for comfort. After all, a hotel as old as this had surely seen its share of stories. But as they slid beneath the sheets, the unease lingered. The thought crept in unbidden. How many people had slept in this bed before, and what memories had been left behind? The lights dimmed, the city's noise muffled beyond the walls, and in that quiet, with sleep just beginning to settle, the guest felt the faintest sensation, a presence in the room, watching, waiting. The night settled heavily over Singapore, but inside the Raffles Hotel, everything appeared calm. The guest had fallen into a shallow sleep, the kind broken easily by unfamiliar surroundings. At first, it was only small things, shifts in the air, the sound of branches brushing faintly against the shutters. But then came something harder to dismiss, a sudden creak, not of wood expanding, but of deliberate pressure. Footsteps. The guest stirred, eyes opening to the faint glow of the bedside lamp left on for comfort. For a moment, silence returned, thick and expectant. They sat up slowly, listening. And there it was again, measured steps, pacing across the corridor outside. At this hour, the wing was meant to be quiet. Other guests had long since gone to bed, and staff rarely passed through. Yet the sound continued, back and forth, boots striking in a rhythm that was neither hurried nor casual. It was precise, like a march. Curiosity wrestled with unease. Slipping out of bed, the traveler opened the door to peer into the hallway. Empty. The photographs lining the walls stared back with frozen smiles and blurred uniforms, but the corridor itself was deserted. The guest frowned, heart beating faster, and shut the door, telling themselves it was only the sound of settling wood, amplified by the stillness of the night. Back in bed, the silence seemed deeper than before, but this time the lamp flickered. Once, twice, then steadied. The guest's pulse quickened. Electrical problems were nothing unusual in older buildings, but here, in this moment, it felt like something else entirely. They glanced toward the corner of the room where the shadows gathered, dark and heavy. For the briefest second, they thought they saw the outline of a figure, but when they blinked, the space was empty again. Morning came with a kind of relief. The courtyard outside filled with birdsong, and the first rays of light softened the unease. The guests dressed quickly, convincing themselves the strange events had only been tricks of a tired mind. But unease returned during breakfast. Seated at one of the colonial-style tables, sipping coffee, the guest overheard two staff members speaking quietly near the entrance. Their voices were low, their words in hushed tones, but one phrase stood out clearly in English. That room again. The guest's head lifted sharply, but the staff noticed and fell silent at once. They exchanged quick glances before moving off, pretending to busy themselves elsewhere. The traveler's stomach tightened. That room again. The words circled like a storm, refusing to be forgotten. Later that day, after meetings ended, the guest returned to the hotel with a strange hesitation. The sun was still high, the lobby alive, with tourists snapping photographs. Yet the thought of stepping back into that room made their chest tighten. Still, habit carried them upward. The elevator doors opened, and once again the corridor greeted them with silence. Something new waited inside. The bed, which had been neatly made in the morning, looked untouched, but on the writing desk near the window, a glass of water had been placed, perfectly full. Condensation ran down its sides. The guest froze. They had left no such request, and room service typically arranged refreshments on trays, not single glasses set in solitude. The longer they stared, the more the sight unsettled them. It was too deliberate, too personal. Knocking on the service line, the guest asked the staff if someone had been in the room. The answer came back politely, firmly. Only housekeeping, and they had left nothing behind. That night, the pacing footsteps returned, louder, closer. This time, they did not stop in the corridor. They entered the room, The sound crossed the floorboards slowly, deliberately, approaching the bed. The guest's breath caught, frozen beneath the covers, eyes fixed on the ceiling. A faint shadow passed across the lamplight, breaking it for only a moment before vanishing again. And in the mirror across the room, a flash of movement. The outline of a man in uniform, standing at the edge of the bed, watching. When the guests turned their head, the space was empty. But the impression lingered as though the figure had only just stepped aside, waiting to return. The first complication was no longer something that could be brushed away. The staff knew. The building carried it. And the guest was no longer certain whether they were meant to sleep in that room or whether they had been placed there for a reason. By the second night, unease had rooted itself deeply. The guests returned late, the city's energy still buzzing in their veins, but the thought of re-entering that room was heavier than any fatigue. The corridor seemed longer this time, the old photographs glaring down with hollow eyes. And when the door opened, the air inside felt stale, as though it hadn't been touched in decades. The glass of water from the day before still sat on the desk. It should have been cleared by housekeeping, yet no one had touched it. The condensation had dried, leaving a faint ring on the polished wood, but the water itself looked untouched, clear and fresh, as if it had been placed there only moments ago. The guest's skin prickled. They decided to distract themselves by calling for dinner. A polite knock came soon after, a young attendant wheeling in a cart. He set the tray neatly, bowed slightly, and turned to leave, but then his eyes flicked toward the mirror. His smile faltered. He stiffened, as if catching sight of something just beyond the guest's shoulder. For a moment, his face drained of color. He glanced back at the guest, lips parting as if to speak, but instead he quickly bowed again and left without another word. Confusion curdled into dread. The guest turned to the mirror, pulse hammering. Nothing was there. Just the reflection of the room. Just the reflection of themselves, standing very much alone. Yet the silence that followed felt louder than any scream. That night, the disturbances escalated. The footsteps returned, but not just pacing outside. They now circled the room. The traveler lay stiff beneath the sheets, every nerve on edge, listening as the sound of boots scraped against the wooden floorboards, pausing, then starting again. The rhythm was unmistakable, measured, disciplined, a march around the bed. At times it stopped near the desk, as if someone stood over it. At other times, by the mirror, but always circling back, relentless. Then came the whispers, faint, broken, in a language too low to understand. They seemed to bleed from the walls themselves, voices layering over each other like echoes of the past. The guest clutched the sheets tighter, pressing them against their ears, but the sound persisted, slipping through the fabric like smoke. The next morning brought no comfort. Over breakfast in the courtyard, the guests found themselves staring at every member of staff, searching for someone who might confirm what they felt. Eventually, an older porter caught their eye. He was moving slowly, carrying luggage across the tiles, but when his gaze lingered on the guest, there was no pretense of hospitality, only concern. Later, as the guest passed him by on the way to the lobby, the porter leaned in slightly, speaking in a low voice, barely above a whisper. "Not all who walk here are living," he said. His eyes flicked toward the older wings of the hotel. "Some men never left. Be careful." Before the guest could reply, he moved off quickly, pretending nothing had been said. That warning echoed in the traveler's thoughts all day. The staff knew. They had to. Their eyes, their silence, their unease, all pointed to something deliberately unspoken. Yet no one dared to explain directly. The hotel's grandeur demanded a facade, but the truth bled through its cracks. When night fell again, the guest tried leaving the lamp burning bright, but it made things worse. Shadows stretched taller against the walls, and in the corner near the mirror, something flickered. A figure, faint, blurred as if seen through smoke. A soldier in uniform, head bowed, standing perfectly still. The guest blinked, rubbed their eyes, but the image remained for one impossible second before dissolving back into darkness. Sleep was impossible. Every sound, the creak of wood, the hum of the fan, even the tick of the clock carried too much weight. The pacing resumed, footsteps heavier than before, circling and circling. The whispers rose again, more insistent this time, as though demanding to be heard. The guest sat up in bed, trembling, and finally whispered into the empty air, "What do you want?" The room answered not with words, but with the slam of the shutters, the curtains whipping violently, though the windows remained sealed. The lamp flickered once, twice, and then went dark, plunging the room into a suffocating shadow. By then, the guest no longer doubted. The Raffles Hotel was not just carrying history. It was living with it, and some part of that history had chosen them. The night of the confrontation began with a silence that felt deliberate, as though the hotel itself was holding its breath. The guest had grown used to the pacing, the whispers, the flickering lights. But this night was different. The air was heavy, pressing against their chest, as if the very walls of the room were closing in. They tried to distract themselves with television, flicking through channels until the static hiss filled the screen. No sound, no image, just white noise crawling across the glass. Frustrated, the guest shut it off. But when the screen went black, their own reflection looked wrong. Behind them, in the mirror's dark surface, was a shape faint, shadowy, the outline of a man in uniform standing directly over their shoulder. The guest spun around. Nothing. The room was empty. Yet the reflection had been too clear, too solid to dismiss. Heart pounding, they backed toward the bed, clutching the talisman they had taken to carrying everywhere. The paper felt useless in their trembling hand, its ink smudging slightly from sweat. Then came the footsteps. Not the slow pacing of before, but a sharp, sudden march. Heavy boots striking the floorboards in perfect rhythm. The sound moved quickly across the room, circling the bed, then stopping near the desk. The guest held their breath, but the sound didn't fade. It was as if someone stood there, waiting, unseen but undeniable. The shutters slammed open without warning. The curtains flew outward, as though pulled by invisible hands, and for a brief moment the courtyard outside was visible, lit faintly by lantern light. But in the glass panes, the reflection did not match the view. Instead of the courtyard, the guest saw rows of soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder, rifles slung across their chests, their heads bowed in silence. The shutters banged shut again, trapping the image in memory. The room seemed darker, colder, and filled with a pressure that made the air thick. And then the voice came. It started as a low murmur, like words muttered under the breath. But quickly it grew louder, clearer, though still foreign. Japanese, the guest realized, though the tone carried no warmth of conversation. It was harsh, commanding, the bark of orders shouted on a battlefield. The voice rose in volume until it echoed through every corner of the room. The guest clamped their hands over their ears, but the sound was inside as much as outside, vibrating through their skull. They stumbled to the door, fumbling with the handle, but it wouldn't budge, locked tight, though the key still sat in the slot. Suddenly, the mirror on the far wall shimmered, its surface rippling like disturbed water. The figure returned clearer this time. A Japanese soldier in full uniform, rope hanging loosely around his neck. His face was pale, his eyes sunken but burning with a strange, mournful fire. He raised one hand, not in threat, but in something like a salute, though his body trembled with the effort. The guest froze, unable to move, as the figure stepped forward, not out of the mirror, but closer within it, pressing his palm flat against the glass, as though trying to break through. Behind him, more figures appeared, blurred shapes in uniform, crowding the reflection, their mouths moving in silent screams. And then the door burst open. 2 staff members rushed in, one older, one younger, both carrying incense sticks burning thick with smoke. Without acknowledging the guest, they moved quickly, circling the room with practiced steps. The older staff member pressed fresh talismans to the mirror, the windows, the headboard of the bed. The younger one muttered prayers under their breath, their voice shaking as the smoke grew heavier. The soldier's reflection slammed his fist against the glass, the sound cracking like a gunshot through the room. The mirror shuddered violently, spiderweb lines spreading across its surface. The staff burned more incense, the smoke filling the air until the reflection blurred, dissolved, and finally vanished. The silence that followed was suffocating. Only the hiss of burning incense remained. The staff looked pale, shaken, their hands trembling as they worked. One turned to the guest, voice low but urgent. "You must not stay here. He is restless. He does not want to be forgotten." The guest tried to speak, but no words came. Their perspective shifted in an instant. This was not a matter of tricks or imagination. The hotel wasn't simply haunted. It was alive with grief, with memories too violent to be contained. And for the first time, the guest realized they weren't just witnessing echoes of the past. They had become part of it. As the staff ushered them out into the corridor, the guest glanced back one final time. The mirror, though covered in talismans, still bore the faint trace of a handprint pressed against the glass. A mark that hadn't been there before, a mark that refused to fade. The hallway outside the room felt like a different world, brighter, safer, even though the air still carried the faint bite of incense smoke clinging to clothes and skin. The guest leaned heavily against the wall, heart hammering, while the 2 staff members moved quickly, shutting the door behind them as if sealing something inside. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the sound of their uneven breathing filled the corridor. Finally, the older of the 2, a man with weathered lines etched deep into his face, broke the silence. His voice was quiet, careful, but edged with exhaustion. "You saw him, didn't you?" The guest nodded slowly, words catching in their throat. The image of the soldier's hollow eyes still burned in their mind, the way his hand pressed against the mirror, leaving that mark behind. The man exchanged a glance with the younger attendant before continuing. He was here during the war, a Japanese officer. When the end came, he refused to surrender. Instead, he ended it himself, inside these walls. People say he believed it was more honorable than facing capture, but his spirit— the man shook his head. His spirit never left. The revelation settled over the guest like ice. Suddenly, the pacing footsteps, the whispers, the marching it all made sense. They hadn't been random noises or tricks of exhaustion. They were fragments of a life violently cut short, looping endlessly, refusing to fade. "He appears most often in the old wings," the younger attendant added, her voice trembling, "the places that carry more of the past. Guests report seeing him in mirrors, in shadows, in the corners of their eyes. Always watching, always walking." The guest swallowed hard, remembering the reflection, the distorted figures that had crowded behind him. "And the others?" "I saw more than one. In the glass, soldiers." The attendants exchanged another look, uneasy. The younger one whispered something in a language the guest couldn't catch before the older man answered. "This hotel is full of history. Not just his. Many died here. Some from sickness, some from violence, some in ways no one likes to speak of. Every wall has soaked up those stories, but his presence is the strongest, the most angry. The guest felt a wave of nausea. The hotel had been chosen for its glamour, its elegance, its name. But behind the polished marble and carefully restored colonial details was a structure built on tragedy, carrying layers of sorrow like sediment. "Why the talismans?" the guest asked, voice unsteady. "The incense? The prayers?" The older staff member gestured back toward the sealed room. "They do not remove him. Nothing can. They only weaken his reach. Keep him contained. For a time. It is all we can do." The guest thought back every flicker of incense they had noticed in the halls, every faint trace of smoke in corners where no guests lingered. It hadn't been coincidence. It had been maintenance, but of a very different kind. Not polishing chandeliers or sweeping tiles, but keeping the dead from breaking through to the living. A chill ran down the traveler's spine. Then why not close the rooms? Why not warn people? The younger attendant looked away, while the older man gave a tired, bitter smile. Raffles is a symbol of Singapore, a monument. People come here expecting beauty, tradition, history. What would they say if we told them the truth? That the past still walks these halls? No, we cannot tell them. We can only manage it. The guest's knees felt weak. Every strange look from the staff, every hushed conversation overheard, every hesitation when handing over a keycard, they all made sense now. It hadn't been paranoia. The staff had known all along. They had simply chosen silence over explanation, ritual over admission. The older attendant pressed something into the guest's hand, a small folded talisman, its yellow paper etched with red ink symbols. "Keep this with you. It will help. But listen carefully. Do not look into the mirrors too long. And if you hear him marching again, do not answer. Do not speak." The warning burrowed deep. Do not speak. As if words alone could tether the living to the dead. The guest stared at the talisman, feeling its fragility between their fingers, yet sensing the weight of generations behind it. Everything they thought they knew about the hotel had unraveled in one night. The glamour was still there, yes, but now it looked like a mask stretched too thin, one crack away from revealing the horrors beneath. As the attendants guided them down the hall toward another wing, the guest couldn't shake the thought. The Raffles was not just haunted. It was curated, maintained, balanced precariously between luxury and nightmare. The soldiers in the glass, the officers' mournful salute, the whispering voices, they weren't accidents. They were reminders that history doesn't vanish simply because people wish it to. And now the guest knew the truth. Every polished corridor, every smiling receptionist, every glittering chandelier carried the burden of silence. The Raffles was alive with ghosts, and the staff were its quiet keepers, working tirelessly to keep the dead from overwhelming the living. But the soldier's mark on the mirror, that print of a hand pressed against the glass, still lingered in the traveler's mind, a mark that no amount of incense could erase. The new room was brighter, closer to the courtyard where laughter and the clink of glasses drifted up from below. The staff assured the guest it was safe, that the officer's presence did not reach this far. A fresh talisman was placed discreetly by the window, another above the headboard, and the attendants left with hushed promises that everything would be fine now. For a time, it seemed true. The air felt lighter. The silence was not so heavy. The guest unpacked once more, trying to shake the memory of the soldier's hollow eyes. Yet when night fell and the hotel settled into quiet, unease crept back in. Sleep came reluctantly, broken by shallow dreams. It was the sound that woke them. Not footsteps this time, but the faint scrape of glass. The guest's eyes snapped open to the sight of the mirror on the wall. In the dim light, condensation spread across its surface, as though someone were breathing against it from the other side. Slowly, letters began to form, traced by an unseen hand. The guest froze, every muscle locking tight. The message was short, jagged, written in strokes that trembled with effort. A single word in English. Remember. The letters lingered for only a moment before fading, leaving the glass cold and clear once more. The guest packed before dawn, hands shaking as they shoved belongings into the suitcase. By the time the sun rose, they were gone from the Raffles, the talisman forgotten on the nightstand. The hotel carried on as it always had, serving tea in the courtyard, greeting tourists with polished smiles, its name gleaming like a promise of elegance. But behind its shutters, the past still walked, and for those who dared to look too closely into the mirrors, the dead were always waiting, ready to remind the living of what could never be erased. I hope you enjoyed these stories. Tomorrow we will be uploading another terrifying story about. Feel free to subscribe and put on your notifications to never miss another scary video. I upload almost every day. Wish you all the best.